question that arises is, did God really say that there would be a day of judgment for the antediluvian world? So, obviously, there is a test, right? And man is judged according to his activities. So, this choice is not just a haphazard choice. Didn't you give a sermon on little things?
Yes.
And did God really say that you should not eat of the fruit of this tree? You said that was a little thing, but look at the big consequences that it had. So even though God is long-suffering, eventually there's a judgment. So in Genesis chapter 6, verse 3, we read, "And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. So Noah preached for 120 years. Now it's interesting that this number, 120, occurs quite regularly in the Bible. And one wonders whether it has any additional meaning.
Yes,
In Genesis chapter 6, verse 7, it says, "And the Lord said, I will destroy man, whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping things, and the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them." So there was going to be a judgment. And then the judgment came. God said unto Noah in verse 13, "The end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence." That's a very important point. "Through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make thee an ark of gopher wood, rooms shalt thou make in the ark, and shall pitch it within and without with pitch." So there is a way of escape, and this was the ark. And if you were in the ark, then you had followed the way of escape.
Yes.
How many people were in the ark?
8.
8. Now, it's interesting when you go into biblical numerology, then 8, the number 8 is often associated with Jesus. Because if you want to look at it, he was resurrected on the first day, which is actually the 8th day in the cycle. And there are many, many places. There are many books on numerology. You can study it. I don't go into it in great detail. But the number 8 is associated with Jesus, and the number 6 is associated with the arch enemy of Jesus, right?
Yes.
So maybe the number 8, just a speculation, is those that are in Christ for the end time, if we apply it. So not just 8 people at the end, but those that are in Christ. Yes. Just a thought. So, this idea of 120 years is also fascinating. So Noah preached for 120 years, and after the 120 years, there was a judgment.
Yes.
And those that were violent were destroyed in the flood. And only those that were safe in the ark were saved. Now, it's interesting that Moses was also 120 years old.
Yes.
When the children went into Canaan.
Yes.
And the Canaanites were dispossessed. And Moses died and was resurrected. Because he went to heaven, because he appeared to Jesus and the disciples on the Mount of Transfiguration. So there was a special resurrection, and we read about it in the book of Jude, where there was this conflict with the devil over the body of Moses. So here again, in Moses' case, it was 120 years. And then the 120 occurs many times in the Bible. The 40 days and the 40-day cycles and the 40-year cycles and all of these, they always or tended to come in threes. So 40, 40, 40 is also 120. Now, some of the Adventist pioneers had the idea that this might be a reference also to the end of time, because if they calculated that if you take 120 jubilees, you get to 6,000 years. Just Himes, for example, had calculations like that. But we won't go into those details now. But it's just interesting that there are these interesting correlations. But the point we are making here is, was there a time of judgment for the antediluvian world?
Yes.
Yes. Does the world today believe that there was a universal flood?
Mostly no.
No. In fact, science says there was no universal flood, but this nice fossil here on this table tells us that there was a universal flood, because the fossil world is buried in watery graves. In fact, fossilization needs very special circumstances, and they need water for the exchange of the minerals to take place. So this is not the original ammonite, this fossil. This is a mineralized copy of it, in other words. But it doesn't take millions of years for these things to happen. And then you have, of course, also these chalk layers, which are foraminifera, unicellular organisms and radiolarians, which are also deposited out of water. So the whole world must have been covered in water, because this is a universal layer. So there was a universal flood, and God destroyed humanity in the past, and only those that were in the ark were saved. Now these serve as a type for the end of time. So my next question would be, did God really say that this judgment was a type of the final judgment? And if we go there to 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 5, he says, "And he spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the 8th person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly, and turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemned them with an overthrow, making them an ensample unto those that after should live ungodly." So this is quite a mouthful. So you have two typologies here. You have the destruction of the antediluvian world in the days of Noah, which serve as a type of the final judgment. And Noah was a preacher of righteousness. The righteousness of Christ is going to be a central part of the final message.
Yes.
How are you saved? You're saved by the righteousness of Christ,
Yes,
right?
correct.
No works. What was the way of Cain?
Works.
Works. And Babylonian religion, what was that?
Also.
It was works.
Yes.
So this was the unique religion where you were not saved by your merits, but you were saved by an alien merit, as Martin Luther put it. A merit which was not part of you, but which came from a higher source, Jesus Christ. And these two religious systems have been in conflict
Since Cain and Abel.
since Cain and Abel. Now the fascinating thing is that even those that were in the truth and believed that the Lamb was the way, even they over time tended to revert back to the Babylonian system. So you might have the truth for a while, and then the sad apostasy comes into the people of God, and eventually they decay and become part of Babylon again. So there's this constant cycle, and every time that they move away, God sends a prophet.
Yes.
And he brings them back, and then they fall away, and then God sends a prophet, and he brings them back, and it's just a constant ebb and flow. Are we going to have the same at the end?
I believe so.
And then he gives this striking example of the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah that were destroyed by fire and brimstone. And this serves as a type, again, for those that should live ungodly at the end of time. So in other words, there was a flood and there was a judgment. Here's the evidence. This creature is extinct, this Ammonite.
Yeah.
There were many, many creatures that lived before the flood that don't exist anymore. In fact, this is one of the arguments that negates the evolutionary theory. Because if evolution was right, you would have to start with a very low density of animals, and you would have to get more and more and more variety as you continue. But in fact, we have a reverse.
Yes.
We have a large number of creatures in the past, and we're getting fewer and fewer as we go along. So we have a reversal there, which shows that there must have been a massive creation with huge variety of animals, many of them being extinct. So the fossils are not an evidence of evolution, but evidence of a much greater diversity in times past. There's another point. The size is reversed. If evolution is correct, then you should evolve from small to large.
Yes.
It's an obvious thing. You don't start evolution with an elephant and end with an amoeba. You start with the amoeba and end off with an elephant at the end, right? But everything was bigger and greater in the past and more degenerate today and smaller. Yes. So, yes, there was a destruction in the past, and God really said there would be a judgment. And we drive our vehicles with the evidence of that judgment. Where does all this organic matter come from that is hidden in the bowels of the earth? It's organic matter. It must have been live at some stage. So when they went into the ark, then God promised them that he would no longer destroy the world with a flood. The final destruction will be with fire, right? Genesis 9:15. Did they believe God when he said, "And I will remember my covenant which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and the waters shall no more become a flood to destroy all flesh"? There might still be local flooding, but there won't be a universal flood. Genesis 11 verse 4 said, and they said, these are the Babylonians. Remember, we're working towards the Babylonian mindset and thinking. "Go, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth." They actually built the tower to overcome a future flood.
Yes.
So they did not believe God. The point that I'm trying to make is that humanity has this tendency not to believe what God really said.
Yes.
And if you don't believe what God really said, then what do you actually believe? It's a very important point.
Yes.